Hello and welcome to Storytelling Through Art, a conversation with Dr. Joan M.E. Gaither at the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. This program is offered in conjunction with the exhibition Art Reframes History, which is now on view until Sunday, May 9th, 2021. My name is Genevieve Kaplan and I'm the Director of Education here at the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. Dr. Joan M.E. Gaither is a nationally known artist and educator from Baltimore, Maryland. She creates documentary story quilts using her artwork to tell stories from her personal experiences as well as those of her local and national communities. She is a veteran teacher, retiring from teaching high school art only to go back to school to earn her PhD before returning to the classroom at the college level at the Maryland Institute College of Art. She taught at MICA until her second retirement after 44 years of teaching. Dr. Gaither began creating large narrative quilts in 2000 with the story of her family. She quickly moved on to create several quilts telling social justice stories in her life and within the context of her regional, national, and global communities. Dr. Gaither uses photographs, text, and everyday materials to share stories. Her largest series, her Decades series, documents the decades of her life utilizing images, text, and items from her personal collections to detail events that influenced her life. In her 1960s quilts, President Kennedy and key cultural, political, and social moments in the decade, including the Civil Rights Movement and Woodstock, feature prominently. Her work centers on community collaborations designed to encourage participants to research and celebrate their own personal histories and stories. Dr. Gaither partners with organizations to capture oral histories and memories from aging storytellers and preserves them in quilts so they will live on. She believes her work speaks to a place in many communities, telling her own story, telling the stories of others, and finally, helping others to find and tell their own stories. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Joan M.E. Gaither.
Hello, I'm Dr. Joan M.E. Gaither. I'm a documentary story quilter, activist, and just really interested in art methods that help to share stories. So I want to share with you just briefly my process and what I do. I'm a documentary quilter, but I'm not a quilter in the traditional sense. I believe that quilts are that object that can tell the human story because it's made from fabrics that belonged to people that make an emotional connection. And quilts are seen more as something that's for decoration, beauty, comfort, and protection. But from my quilting from the soul process, I believe the quilt can hold the entire message, not just in the feel of the fabric, but in the images that are on it, and just to give you a sense of time, place, as well as events. I am an artist, and the work that I'm going to share with you is based on basically these 4 identity concepts that artists use their own personal experiences as subject matter for their artwork. And that this whole relationship of social groups and the inspiration that comes about with the people in your community is active and also is absolutely ripe for portraying it in some visual form. And artists over time have used their medium to document heroes, headliners, trailblazers, as you will see in a great deal of my work. So as I get started, before I show you any work, in the same way that those identity questions or statements propel the direction of my work and the thinking, I'm also driven by what I call really existential questions or important questions that I ask myself to tell to get to the subject of the work. Who am I? From where did I come? You know, who are my people? What's my neighborhood? How long have I been here? What are the things? And I pay a particular attention to what our shared history is. what things we do share in terms of politics, inventions, cultural arts. It's for everybody, and we're not isolated from that. So I use my work to try to help people to come together, if you will, in a way that helps us all to understand that we are more alike than not alike. And for the work, for the problems I set for folks that are in my workshops, to think about what if situation. What if things were a little different from me than they have been? What if, or think about things that really make me unique. So I also consider asking, who do I already know that works in this same manner, sort of part to whole, or works in a series or tries to show a time lapse. And that's where my particular focus is. I'm an artist who tells stories with pieces and parts. This is a very early collage that I did right out of high school. And it's my family portrait. And I have to tell you that at this moment, this young man is my older of my younger brothers, and he is soon to be 70 years old. So that just, lets you know this is my entire family, which now documents a neighborhood that is almost extinct because of the development and the building that's around. But these are no more than photographs. The words are cut from magazines. I loved going through magazines and looking at the typeface to find words that would speak my story. So for those who say, I can't make letters, I can't draw or whatever, I appropriate really very often. Now, as I get started, I normally think about taking a piece of paper and just folding it, sort of arbitrarily into folding it twice in both directions so that you get 9 sections. If you don't want to do that, you can just take a piece of paper and draw some lines down so that you have some quadrants. And I like the idea of an uneven or an odd number so that that center panel can be used as sort of the feature theme square or box. My junior high teacher told me that to be an artist, you're never at a loss for subject matter because everybody has a story to tell, and you know yourself and you are the best person to tell your story. So I start out sometimes just putting my name in this center box and then using the other squares around it, boxes around it, to emphasize and put in ideas that would support that. If you don't want to think about doing, I would like for you, as you're listening to the rest of the presentation, to think about maybe being inspired to create a quilt, either single square, or that one square could be the beginning of a bigger and larger quilt. So if it's not yourself, think about the people who have inspired you to be the best person that you can be. Think about those characteristics, not only from yourself. What are the things that, if you go beyond your name and the color of your skin, what really is your voice and your identity? I am an American, I'm a Marylander, I'm a community activist, I'm a mentor, educator. My name means child of God, I'm Methodist. There's so many things. I'm a photographer, I'm a painter, so many things that you can say who you are. So start to think right now, part to whole, what are all of my parts that make up who I am? Or what are those things that make up a person, someone who is really in close contact with me, whether it be someone in your own home, it could be a grandparent, a teacher, it could be a neighbor down the street, but someone that you can really reflect on. What are the things that makes this person important? What are the words? What are those signifiers of identity? Right now, people who know me know that I normally dress in black. I most often have some kind of pattern, big jewelry, eyeglasses. So what are those just physical things about you, but also what are the favorite things about you or this person? On one of my quilts, I've had a t-shirt for Fruit Loops, which was my favorite cereal that I ate when I was younger. But so it's like, what can you do? And as you're planning and thinking about your quilt and how to do this, I started out with one single square, but then with this process, you can cut the pieces different sizes, you can do borders, you can number, these are numbered so that we know that I wanted to put people's faces around this edge. Where you see the diagonals, the fabrics would be of different colors. So again, it really emphasizes working part to whole. As you do this, and I think about how I divide my quilts and pieces up. This one is my mentor. So again, my junior high teacher told me that you can tell your own story. And for this quilt, I wanted to, in my American way, with the red, white, and blue patriotic fabric, celebrate these folks who have been important to me: college teachers, high school teachers, parents, grandparents, artist friends. Lois Maylou Jones over here had a studio on Martha's Vineyard, and she really is a mentor. So it's like, who knows? And then a number of the women who were very politically active in the 1960s and have risen to great heights they were just part of my community. So you just never know. Think about words. My grandmother said, soar as high as you can, never get cocky, and always stay spiritual. So what are those words that ground you as you do this? Telling your whole story might mean you would do a whole quilt just about yourself as a self-portrait. And this was my first self-portrait, and it's all t-shirts and embellishments. And we all have, I'm sure, just tons of t-shirts around. You cut off the design part, and then you can use the rest of the t-shirt for filling or batting in your quilt if you don't, to help make it that quilted feel that you want. But this piece has all the t-shirts, and I decided I was going to put photographs of me on the quilt all the way around, with me in places with my family and friends when I visited. And I also added, and I thought, wow, this still is not, I need to make this more me. So I added this portrait, a painted face from one of my other large oil painting portraits I'd done, and then transferred the images onto, fabric sheets. But you add things. What I like about this process and doing part to whole is you can find pieces and parts of your old wardrobe. This is my hippie belt. These are my actual socks, comfort socks, and I'm still looking for a pair like them since they're on my quilt. It's my passport bag that you can put on. So it's so many things that you do. And again, you come back to that square where we talk about what are those signifiers of identity. There is my hat. You can see I usually have glasses, dark glasses. And with this particular detail, what I like about it is this t-shirt. I was in Paris when McDonald's opened their first restaurant there, and one of the items available was the Mona Lisa holding her French fries. I just think that's so funny. And then after the fact, oops, maybe I should not have cut that up. It's probably a collector's item. But at any rate, you find things that speak to who you are, your sense of place. What are the buildings, the monuments, the teams that are significant to your area? And then down the bottom here, this little tab was, you never know where you're going to find things to put on your items or on your quilt. This was a label inside of a sweatshirt. And I thought, roots, oh yeah, I'll just put that on the square near whatever my Baltimore information is to let folks know this is from where I've come. Now, as I think about materials and things that people have, quilts we usually think about as sewn and stitched, but this piece is one of my smaller pieces. I tend to work very large, but this small piece is made with all pins. There are no threads in this at all, not even for the rod pocket. And I wanted to juxtapose, which is one of my techniques, a really beautiful fabric with an ugly, ugly subject matter to draw people in. So this is called How Much Longer, with 24 selected images of memories. The story that I tell are 24 incidences of racial hatred against my person. And close up, you can see the pins. I just use in a decorative way, but it's really what's holding everything together. And you'll see here a reoccurring phrase or references from a very early age. I was called anything and everything other than my name. And most of them were not they were ugly, ugly words. So I put my name is, or I am a person, I am somebody, that you'll see over and over again. This particular design is done with fabric sheets that normally I put them in my printer, and anything you have on your computer that you can see, you can print out on a fabric sheet, iron on or sew in. And in this case, I use the iron on fabric to use my fabric markers almost in a child's hand to put down the story that I wanted to tell, and carefully ironed it into the center of the squares and then pinned everything together. One of my identifiers is I always, if I'm seen in public, I have a hat, and my family too. And I showed this as a part of these acts of racial hatred. I often say people don't know who I am, yet they feel compelled to say something that is absolutely ugly about who they think I am. But when you see me with the hat, I was with my grandmother, memory from when I was about 10 years old in a downtown department store in Baltimore. And at that time, my grandmother wanted to buy a hat. She wanted to try it on, and the sales lady wouldn't let her try it on. And when I said, but what if it doesn't fit? The sales lady was very quick to say to me, she said, if you put that hat on your head, no decent white woman would ever want to wear it. So I just wondered at that, but I knew that my grandmother was a decent woman. And so I wear hats all the time, and the women in my family wear hats to show the respect for the lady we knew our grandmother to be and the ladies that we know we are today. But you can see these pins as they move through. You start close to home and like a pebble. George says, who was my junior high art teacher, again, a mentor and influence. You have to pay attention to the words of the elders here. But if you tell your story, think about yourself as a pebble that you throw in the water, and as it ripples out, it's your family members, it moves out into your city and so forth, until you get to the broader, larger humanity. So I did quilts about myself, quilts about my grandmother's story, my mother's story. I did a huge quilt about my entire family, 7 generations. And when I looked at it, I was able to trace it back to, you can see my grandmother here in the middle at the top, and then her mother, and then her mother. And then these are all of my grandmother's children and their families as we do this. And one of our local international artists that lives in Baltimore, Joyce Scott, came to Maryland Institute when I first exhibited this piece as a part of the faculty collection. And she looked at it, she said, "Monumental works, it really works." So I hold her totally responsible for the size of my work. It gets people's attention, and it allows you that much more space to embellish and to tell more of the story. And that small quilt that I showed you, How Much Longer, with the pins, is about half the size of this quilt, which pays homage to Henrietta Lacks. And a number of my quilts honor folks of color that have contributed to our overall American history and culture. And I just think those stories need to be told. So this probably the national Black Theater Festival in Winston-Salem that honors the director. I think that's the largest quilt that I did, and that's 10 feet by 14 feet long. I wanted to put out here, so many people will say to me, traditional, I'm a real quilter, they'll say. I don't do what you do, in a very distasteful way. But I let them know that everybody has a story. And while I can quilt traditionally, I prefer to create my own stories and encourage other people to create stories that are truly their own pattern, their own working. And again, for the size of the quilt, I decided I would do this long series. Again, looking at artists who work in series like Jacob Lawrence, Romare Bearden, folks that artists that you can see that they are telling the story over time. So I decided to do this decade series, which has 42 growing quilts in the series. This piece here is the overview, which sort of segments my life and my story. It's like my spiritual self, my family, biological self, my work, and my cultural self. And if you move over here, you can see the size of this quilt, because here I am at 5'7", and my fellow artist is over 6 feet tall. So I work really on a very large scale. So with this, I want to go through these very quickly. They were the first two quilts for the 1940s, which was the decade in which I was born. I was born in war, and during this series, I discovered, or emerging from that, is that America has been in war somewhere my entire life. But the 240s quilts, they're 350s quilts, 460s, 570s, they grow in number, they grow in size, to give you a way to look at it. One of my favorite decades, and I think important, because the greatest changes in my life happened in the 1960s. And for anybody else who lived through that, it documents a shared experience, regardless of what your story is. That story goes into the memories that are related to our politics. This one, for each of the quilts in this series, I've tried to indicate who the president and the vice president, and here is JFK. The piece, I'm going to go forward here a bit. This piece started out just layering. So again, you think about that big square and you just start adding things that help to tell your story. This is my tie-dye 60s jumpsuit that I cut up and put down. This is my, as my brothers say, my hippie bag. This is my Woodstock vest that I put on, covered some of it up, and then added the Beatles and so forth. But it's the major events, Vietnam, Woodstock. I think about Apollo, and most folks think, oh, that's the man on the moon. But at the same time, Black in America, it's that theater in New York, in Harlem, that propels artists and entertainers to get started on their own stardom. And my quilt layer information, what's in the movies, what's on TV, what's in the inventions and things that are going on. In a real close-up, again, using this process and the embellishments, I use anything you can put your hands on. These are Christmas beads that people usually use to put on, to decorate in December on their trees. But I just use a fabric glue paint as a trail and then lay the beads on top of it. And then I also will go and stitch it to be sure that it's in place. And all of this information here in the middle are inventions and things that occurred during this particular time. So to go quickly, there are numerous faces of me that I've used transfer fabrics. There's always patriotic symbolism. And for me, being Black in America, my red, white, and blue, while I'm proud to be an American, it's been really hard and painful. So I will use pins to outline the edge of it to signify that pain that continues. So a close-up detail really allows you to focus on the tactile quality of the work. And this reoccurring, I am somebody, I am a person, which continues in my work today. Even just the word me shows up often. Butterflies, flowers are another, with my appreciation and connection to nature. And the little letter B's that you just use on the quilt. This piece sticks up about 5 inches from the wall. This is an actual crochet hat that I've cut the top out of to indicate, as a woman, I do have a brain. I can think. So here we are. The 60s again, and it allows you to think about, and I encourage people, as you're telling your story, don't tell your story in isolation. What else is going on? So this 60s quilt just really shows this period of time, which has been crucial to me. I graduated from high school in the 60s, from college, got married, had my first job, bought my first car, while at the same time, Malcolm X was assassinated. So was Martin Luther King, JFK, Bobby Kennedy, all of these events. And this quilt would be very appropriate even today, with folks struggling for freedom, the right to vote, and to get out and to be a participating member of our country, and to be able to see our story, but it is under the umbrella of one history. So there are 5 1970s quilts. I'm just gonna kind of go through these. They are doilies that are used over and over again. I use them as a symbol for passing in time and legacy. And it's something that most people can relate to, which they can relate because somebody in their family did doilies or made doilies. And I think it's just, it allows me to add objects and images on top. It also allows me to use them to camouflage, to cover up things that maybe are hidden and we try to be silent about. 1980s, I was out of America the entire decade. If I wasn't teaching, I was out of the country because I felt safer there. They saw me as an American, not as those ugly names that you're called when you live here, Black in America. In the 1980s, also part of the concepts is that you tell your story, you tell the stories of others. So Martin Luther King, this is in the 80s when they had the March on Washington, March in Washington, and celebrating his birthday for it to be a holiday. 80s, at the time that we show, trying to get this to, yes, I use, again, t-shirts, iron-on letters, sew-in letters, wonderful jewelry pieces. The butterfly is honors my grandmother. She said to me, "Goddaughter, God sends angels to protect you, and they come in the form of flight. So watch particularly for butterflies." So we are able to see that. Jewelry. My screen has frozen. Okay. Again, this is the 1990s, going through with my epiphany, where I discovered that I was an artist, an educator. I was a holistic a teacher in my thinking, and documenting at the same time. So we get to see a time when, you know, again, in the 1990s, that was the Clinton impeachment and things that were going on. And by the time I got to 2000, and I couldn't show all of the quilts in the series, so I did one big overview quilt that shows from the year 2000 to 2015. Again, many with t-shirts looking at the issues of the time as we go through. And now, you know, I probably say that's all well and good for you, but as a bigger community, I did this quilt that's on the table, Trails, Tracks, Tarmac. And I went to the people in my community to get information. They had so much stuff that I ended up with a crazy quilt and a whole lot of people. And the folks who worked on this quilt were as young as my great niece, age 4 at the time, and Miss Iantha down here in the corner, who was 104. So taking this process to the community allows for their input and great party in the process. But they ended up with so much information. I had a small workshop and taught them how to do their quilt. These are 36 by 36. We ended up with 26 quilts altogether. And as a result of this, and that's what I want to say, this process of quilting from the soul allows the community in, but it doesn't go away. So if you do this, you have to be committed to it. As a result of that quilt and that series, we became a 501c3 group, North Arundel Cultural Preservation Society. We've published 2 books, multiple CDs, a number of exhibitions all across the state and in Washington, D.C., multiple CDs, inclusion programs, drop-in programs. It's it. This is a process that children can use. This, in terms of museums, this was a drop-in activity on a Saturday, and these young folks came in, and their charge was to create a single square that told a story that was important to them that only they could tell. This young man here was so excited about being able to ride on equipment that his father had this big sort of bulldozer piece of equipment. So that was his topic. This young lady here just really touched my heart because she lost her dad in the towers, the fall of the Twin Towers. And she made this square to honor her dad. And as you can see, this drop-in experience, these children were able to come away with a square that told a story important to them in about an hour and a half. And it's no more than that top piece, a thin piece of batting, and then a back fabric that you put on and just overlap it to the front. I've worked with an art teacher who did a quilt that showcased their community school. And this black is just plain old black ribbon with a yellow stitch across it to show the roads. It's the businesses, it's the school, it's the people. And then the teacher was able to get every child in the school to participate by putting a color bead on. This working in groups, one of the really big successes for the museum and for the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. Pratt Marshall was the vice chair, and she was my contact person. And when I designed the pieces, I just cut the fabric pieces out, the colors, and she distributed to the commissioners that were assigned to all 23 counties and the city of Baltimore to hand out to people in their community who had firsthand knowledge of that community. And with 426 people, we were able to complete this quilt. And we know it was that many because one of our members made sure that everybody signed in at every workshop that we had. But it started out, again, here's that box and that grid and the squares. And for this one, the three sections, the top third are the colors of the Maryland flag. The bottom third is the bottom half of the Maryland flag. And then through the middle is the shades of blue that represent Annapolis, the Chesapeake Bay, and the role of, in this case, the US colored troops, that time, the votes, and the actual document, an article that freed the slaves in Maryland. So what you see here are just the panels that I stick pinned together, and they distributed them, and then the folks in the groups just sort of pinned things on. They're found objects, they're actual little flags. Some folks did embroidery. They're buttons from antique buttons from the soldiers' uniforms. So, and they run things off on the fabric sheets that they could just iron on for the information. So their task was to design a square that documents the history of events, the heroes, the heroines, the objects, the places in your area at the time when the slaves were freed in Maryland, which was 1864, not when Lincoln did the Emancipation Proclamation, because it only freed the slaves in those states that were in rebellion with the Union, and Maryland was not. Here's one of the squares to show you what the folks were able to include. And then historically, there's usually a map, a seal. On each one of the squares are these gold stars in a blue field. They were given a sample piece of fabric, and they could use all 6 of them, 1 of them, or however, and then a small piece of railroad fabric. There are numbers here that show the vote. This many people, 9,779, voted to get rid of slavery. And then in 2058 people wanted to keep slavery. Over here, you could again see the size of this piece with some of the members at the unveiling. And that's the other piece I think that museums and cultural groups would be interested in, is that these folks have access to information that museums don't have. And it allows it to come out into focus. Again, another drop in dealing with the history and the shared experience. Reginald Lewis Museum was having an exhibit on the American flag and what it stands for whom it stands. So this is a collaborative piece that's become a part of their permanent connection, where people, families of all colors, persuasion, ages came together to create this quilt, to say, this is what the flag means to me, this is my story. Celebrating trailblazers. This one honors the Harlem Renaissance, and this is one of 2 large quilts that documents the cultural contributions to who we are and significant events. I decided just a couple of years ago to make a quilt. I got a t-shirt. This is the front of the t-shirt. This is the back of the t-shirt. And this is, it's women who were just contributing to the greatness of America. And they were all women of color. So I decided to use this t-shirt as the center jumping off points, if you will, to telling the story. It was only going to be 100 faces, but then 266 plus faces and more. It just kept growing. And when I show this piece, there's a chart paper there for people to add names of who they'd like to have on my auxiliary piece that I would be making. But again, it's t-shirts, it's fabrics, and this piece is partially in the working. You can still see some of the stick pins that are there, and that constant theme of red, white, and blue that would be running through. And in here, Tamara Hall, there, I put not just their faces, but I eventually ended up putting the state where they were born and where their legacy begins. And there are 5 women on this quilt from the 266 that their roots and their legacy story started in Texas. So this piece is fairly large. Again, to go back to this idea of having a focus, what's your story, what's your center panel, what are the anchoring points, what tells you to support what's going on. And here again, you can see the size of this piece. The latest piece that I have, as I sort of come to sort of a close here, was a piece I started many years ago, even though this says America 2019. The center part I started in 2014, just to tell the story of, to illustrate the lyrics of the Christmas song, the 12 Days of Christmas, and what their religious symbolism meant. And then in the process, as I got down to the 8 Beatitudes, the 9 fruits of the Spirit, the 10 Commandments, it's like, oh my goodness, if you're not following these things, then bad things kind of happened. And when I looked at the situations that were propelled, it caused me to look at those conditions that were in place for the fall of the Roman Empire, and which are the same very conditions that have been in place for possibly the fall of the US. And I started putting that on. You can see that in the black letters that go across. And this is one of the early stages when it was not totally completed, but people started talking about, oh my goodness, this feels like the end times, the world is coming to an end, which led me to the book of Revelation and the surrounding this piece. And my goal was to make it like a medieval stained glass window with bright colors and embellishment to get people's attention for them to then read the story. And for Genevieve at your museum, I put this square in panel in just for you, because Genevieve has been one of my critics. She's not a harsh critic. She just tells me what it is. So one of the squares for the 7 days of Christmas was the 7 swans are swimming. And she looked at me and said, why do you have ducks where it should be swans? And I said, they're not ducks. She said, a third grader would tell you, them are ducks, they're not swans. She said, they're the wrong color, they don't have the right length of neck. And I had to go, oh yeah, she's right. So I started to take them off. But for those of you who don't know my process, and because I use so many things that are attractive to folk, in order to prevent them from taking them off my quilt, I glue them on, I stitch them on, and then I cover the edges with fabric paint. It took me 3.5 hours to pull these 3.5 parts of the ducks off of my quilt. But I replaced them with images of swans that I sewed in, and because I was patching, ended up having to use some more of the paint, fabric paints, to cover up my third graders, them are ducks. But the surrounding part of the story and the quilt is from that book of Revelation. And one of my colleagues, Olivia Robinson, helped me to add yet another new portion to it, and the LED lighting, and just finding things that you can use. You can see the lights. This piece is, again, not my largest piece, but it's 9 feet wide and 12 feet long. That really highlights this story. Right now, the new quilt that's on my table, and the working title is Diversity Not Really. I just know that, you know, in the news and how diverse we are as a nation. I have a quilt with 50 squares for all 50 of our states, and embroidering, if you will, and putting on the their individual choice of state flowers, state insects, state birds, state animal. They have historic buildings and everything, but yet the one piece that is consistent in all 50 states, regardless of how beautiful and what's going on, is the killing of unarmed Blacks in America by police. And you can Google and search the internet and just type in unarmed Blacks killed by police in Arkansas, Alabama, just every state. And it just hurts my heart to see that these numbers are here. And then I've attached key rings to each of these, sort of like a holding, like holding keys. This will hold the numbers of the hate groups and the rise of hate groups in America. When I started tracking this in 2015, Maryland had 15 known hate groups. That number has gone to 35. Tennessee, Texas, those numbers have increased to 66. So it's like every state, it's every state across our nation. And that's not diverse. It is most consistent, sadly, to speak and to say. So I have done this presentation and I share the process because it allows people to just go crazy with what they want to include in their story. Tell your story with purpose. Own your own voice, visualize that voice, celebrate that voice, and share your voice. And that's what this presentation is about. I just want to thank you for your time. The quilt behind me is called I Am, and it is 7 decades of my life, not just with pictures of me over time, but it's the inventions, it's the words and names that I've been called over these years. But most important, as you can see, I am. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Gaither, for your wonderful program. I know that I will definitely be using your brainstorming methods to help me as I work on creating interpretation here at the museum for our audiences. And thank you to you, our audience, for joining us today. We appreciate your support and hope that you will join us again for future programs. Upcoming programs may be found on the museum's website at www.jfk.org. Art Reframes History is now on view at the 6th Floor Museum until Sunday, May 9th, 2021. For more details on the exhibit, please visit www.jfk.org/Art Reframes History. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.